A lonely mountain man saves a young woman in the river without knowing what awaited him. Emma traveled in a covered wagon surrounded by trunks that smelled of lavender water. She was the daughter of a judge from the East, promised to an influential man she barely knew. Her destination was California, where a large house awaited her, a convenient alliance, and a life written by others. The wagon train moved through mountains and rivers, slow but steady, until that day everything changed. Hello, my dear friend. This is Jasper Ashwood, your narrator of Mountain Tales. Before we start, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from. A big hug to you all, and I hope you enjoy the story. A pack of wolves came down from the mountain. They emerged suddenly from the trees when the wagon was trying to cross a creek. The first one lunged into the water. The horses whinnied in confusion. One reared up. The wheel gave way to the mud, and then, without warning, the wagon overturned. Emma fell to one side, felt the hard blow against a rock, and then the river current dragging everything away. Fabric, wood, the driver's body, the horse, everything disappeared between branches and foam. She could barely grab onto a log. Her skirt weighed like lead. The water hit her face. She screamed, but no one answered. With her hip aching and fingers trembling, she managed to hold onto a stone on the shore. She crawled through mud, moss, and roots until she got out of the river. She coughed, gasped, trembled, but she was alive, soaked, stunned, with torn clothes and hair stuck to her skin. Emma struggled to her feet. In the distance, she heard a growl, one and then another. The wolves were still following her. She started walking, then running. Each step hurt, but she couldn't stop. The branches scratched her arms, the roots blocked her path. She clung to the trees to keep from falling. Her breathing became faster, more desperate. When she thought she had left them behind, the forest whispered again, branches breaking, leaves moving behind her. Emma stopped, looked in all directions, her heart pounding at her temples. She thought it was them again, that they hadn't given up, and then she saw them. There were 4 dark ones with eyes shining in the undergrowth. They approached, crouched, confident. She backed away, stumbled, fell to her knees, no longer had strength. But before the first wolf could jump, a whistle cut through the forest and an arrow stuck in the ground, right in front of the animal. A second whistle, another arrow. The wolves stopped, sniffed the air, and then fled. Emma didn't understand what had just happened. She stayed there trembling, voiceless, until she saw him. A tall figure emerged from the trees without speaking, without running, just walking toward her with the bow still in his hand. His face was firm, his eyes dark and calm. He was a man, but he seemed part of the forest itself. Emma crawled backward, frightened. "No, don't hurt me," she murmured. The man looked at her. He didn't speak immediately, just crouched beside her. "You're hurt," he said with a strange accent. She tried to understand him. "Who are you? What do you want?" He didn't answer her. Emma had no choice. Her legs weren't responding. Her fingers were numb. He covered her with a rough blanket, took her in his arms, and began to walk. He said no more. The cabin was on top of a hill hidden among thick trees. It wasn't pretty. It had no ornaments, but it was dry, silent, alive. He placed her on a blanket by the fire, offered her a bowl of water, arranged a clean cloth over her forehead. Emma, barely conscious, murmured a name. "Jeremiah." He didn't respond, just sat nearby, watchful, motionless, and while the fire crackled and the rain washed away the traces of what had happened, Emma closed her eyes, not yet knowing if that stranger was her salvation. The morning entered slowly through the cracks in the roof, illuminating the interior with a golden light, as if the mountain still doubted whether to let the day begin. Emma opened her eyes with difficulty. She felt her body numb, her throat dry, and a vague pain in her hip reminded her of the fall, but she was alive. She looked around. The ceiling was made of crossed logs. The floor, packed earth covered with thick blankets. Beside her an empty bowl, and beyond him. He was sitting by the fire with his back turned, stoking the embers with a stick. His silhouette was solid, his presence quiet. He hadn't left. Emma sat up with effort. Jeremiah barely turned his face. "Not fast. Pain," he said in a grave voice, pointing to her hip. She looked at him steadily. She still didn't know whether to fear him. His accent was strange, as if each word cost him to get through his throat. But she understood him. Not everything. Enough. Where am I? Mountain, refuge. He got up fluidly. He didn't walk like the men from the east, straight and rigid. He moved as part of the environment, as if the earth had molded him. He approached slowly with a steaming bowl. Hot drink. Emma took the container with trembling hands. The liquid had a strange smell, but not unpleasant. It was a broth made with roots, herbs, and something else she couldn't identify. What is this? Jeremiah crouched by the fire. He didn't respond immediately, just looked at her sideways. Not poison. She let out a short, unexpected laugh, an absurd reflex in the middle of the confusion. Thank you, I suppose. Rest today, walk tomorrow. Emma drank a sip, felt the warmth run through her chest. He watched her without insistence, like someone who is used to not getting answers. Jeremiah, she said, repeating the name she had heard. That's your name, he nodded. Means hunter. And you know how to speak my language. He tilted his head a little. Soldiers taught. Were you with them? Jeremiah stood up without answering. The day passed slowly. Emma tried to get up, but Jeremiah stopped her. He bandaged her leg with leaves and a clean cloth. He offered her more water, a piece of coarse bread. She ate in silence, watching him. He wasn't young like the boys in her city, but not old either. He had broad shoulders, strong hands, a face weathered by the sun. In his eyes, there was something she couldn't name. Not violence, not tenderness. Something more primitive, as if he carried within him the echo of a world without clocks or names. In the afternoon, Jeremiah left. She didn't know where or for how long. Fear returned for a moment, like a familiar shadow. But he didn't close the door with bars, didn't take his things, just left a blanket over her legs and looked at her before leaving. Return soon. Rest. When he returned, he brought firewood and fresh fish. Emma helped him prepare the fire. They didn't know how to talk to each other well, but something in the body supplied the words. Point, look, nod. It was clumsy, but it worked. Do you have family? She asked in the evening without expecting an answer. Jeremiah kept looking at the fire. Then he said, all far away. Emma didn't ask anymore. That night he slept by the entrance, wrapped in his own blanket. He didn't touch her, didn't come close, didn't try to look more than necessary, just stayed vigilant, quiet. She fell asleep listening to the crackling of the fire, the whistling of the wind through the branches, and the constant rhythm of his breathing on the other side of the cabin. And for the first time since the accident, fear didn't take away her sleep. The days had no names on the mountain, only different lights, different sounds. Emma began to measure time by the smoke from the fire, by the shadows that lengthened at dusk, and by the way the air became cooler when the sun went down behind the pines. She no longer counted how many days she had been there. She didn't know if it was 4, 6, or 8, and for the first time she didn't care too much. Jeremiah spoke little, but it wasn't an aggressive silence. Rather, it was a respectful space, a terrain that he didn't invade, and that Emma got used to without knowing she needed it. Every morning he offered her food, checked her wound, and then left to hunt, check traps or look for firewood. He returned when the sun went down. Always she, for her part, began to move inside the cabin like someone learning the limits of a new home. She didn't open foreign trunks, didn't touch objects she didn't understand, but she washed her bowl, spread her blanket, and picked up some dry herbs for the fire. She was beginning to know the place and him. One afternoon, while Jeremiah was preparing a knife with a sharpening stone, Emma approached cautiously. She sat in front of him. Between them there was a prudent distance, like a bridge they still didn't know how to cross. What is this called? She asked, pointing to a plant hanging from the ceiling. Jeremiah looked up. Willow bark. What's it for? For cough. She nodded, repeating the word quietly, like someone learning a spell. Then she pointed to another. And that? White sage. And do you have a name besides Jeremiah? He hesitated for a moment. Jeremiah is the name. Nothing else. Means hunter, doesn't it? Yes. Why? Jeremiah looked for a few seconds. It wasn't common for him to do it for so long. Then he said, because when I was a boy I fell into a crack in the ground. No one could get me out. But a hawk stayed flying over the hole all day until my father found me. He said the hawk took care of me. Emma didn't know what to answer. There was something so pure in that story, so different from everything she knew, that she could only nod. I've never seen one up close. There are many here, he pointed to the sky with his head, but you have to know how to look. They spent a few minutes in silence. Then Jeremiah offered her a piece of dry bread. Eat. She took it. She no longer doubted. She looked at him with a small, almost shy smile. "Thank you." Jeremiah looked down, but his lips barely moved. "You're welcome." That day, Emma went outside the cabin alone for the first time. She walked a few meters, leaning on a stick he had carved for her. The forest was bigger than she imagined, more alive. Everything had sound, shape, intention. The breeze brought her new aromas, wet earth, resin, wildflowers. Far from the noise of the world, she discovered another kind of language. On the way back, she found Jeremiah feeding the dogs. She stopped for a moment, watching him. He had a strange way of being in the world. He didn't seek attention. He didn't need to talk. But everything he did had purpose, as if every action spoke for him. "How do you say thank you in your language?" asked Emma. Jeremiah looked at her. "Much obliged," she repeated clumsily. He shook his head gently and said it again, more slowly. "Much obliged." Emma tried again. He nodded. "Better. And how do you say name?" "Monica." "And what do you call me?" "Emma," he said with strangely precise pronunciation. She smiled. "You say it better than me." Jeremiah looked down. He went back to cutting strips of meat, but between his lips formed a small curve. Not an open smile, just a hint. Emma noticed it and knew they were beginning to understand each other, not because of languages, but because of what was between the words, because of the way they were no longer enemies or strangers, just two people who, without having planned it, had learned to live together in the only language that doesn't need translation, that of respect. One of those fine rains that don't soak but penetrate fell all night, silent and persistent, as if the sky wanted to wash something without making noise. Emma had gotten wet while collecting dry branches at the edge of the clearing. She said nothing. Jeremiah didn't either, but he watched her sideways as she took off her soaked cloak and hung her boots by the fire. The next morning, she didn't get up. Jeremiah noticed the different silence. It wasn't the quiet silence of someone asleep, but the dense one, the one that weighs in the air. He approached. Emma had her eyes closed, her face pale, her forehead damp. When he placed his hand on her skin, he felt the heat. "Fever," he murmured. He didn't wait. He left for the forest without saying a word, moving fast like a shadow among the trees. He knew what he was looking for: oak leaves, willow bark, bitter root. He returned with his hands full and his face serious. He prepared an infusion in silence. He placed cold compresses on her forehead, moistened her lips with water, stayed by her side, sitting for hours. Emma spoke while sleeping, not in complete sentences, loose words, sometimes his name, sometimes her mother's, sometimes just sound without form. Jeremiah didn't respond, but he listened like someone who memorizes another's dreams without asking permission. On the fourth day, the fever broke. She woke up with clouded eyes. She saw him by the fire, grinding something in a bowl. "How long did I sleep?" "4 suns," he answered without looking up. Emma tried to sit up, but he approached quickly and stopped her with a firm hand. "No, rest more." She obeyed, although it was hard for her, not out of rebellion, but out of habit. In her world, women didn't stay still without apologizing. "Thank you for taking care of me." Jeremiah nodded. "You said my name in your fever." She looked at him, surprised. "I remembered it." "Yes, also mother and home, and you cried." Emma looked down. She wasn't ashamed, not before him. "What else did I say?" "Nothing ugly," Jeremiah answered with unexpected softness. That afternoon, while she slept again, Jeremiah went out. When he returned, he brought something wrapped in a cloth, a carved bone pendant in the shape of a hawk. He had made it long ago, long before meeting her, but for some reason he had decided to finish it that night. He left it next to her water bowl. He said nothing. Emma found it when she woke up. She held it between her fingers, tracing the figure with her fingertip. She didn't ask if it was for her, she just held it against her chest with silent gratitude. Later, while they shared the broth by the fire, Emma dared to ask, "What happened to your shoulder?" Jeremiah remained motionless. She was referring to the scar he always hid under his shirt, an irregular old line that went down from the neck to the upper part of the chest. He had never shown it until that day. Without saying a word, he unbuttoned 2 buttons and let the fabric fall a little. Emma held her breath. The wound was ugly, deep, as if the metal had wanted to mark him forever. "White soldier, captive 4 moons. Why? Because I was born on the wrong side." His words were simple, but in them fit an entire universe. She didn't know what to say. A knot formed in her throat, not from pity, from rage, from helplessness. from the way her world had been built on the humiliation of others. "You didn't deserve it," she said finally. Jeremiah looked at her. "I know. That's why I didn't let myself die." There was a long silence. That night, when the fire was dying out, Emma didn't return to her usual corner. She sat right next to him with her legs crossed and the blanket over her shoulders. They didn't talk anymore. They just listened to the forest, the embers crackling, the dogs breathing nearby, and without looking for it, they shared something more than the warmth of the fire, the beginning of a trust that no longer needed proof. The forest was quieter than usual. It wasn't a natural silence, but a tense, contained one, as if the trees were listening to something humans couldn't hear. Jeremiah felt it on his skin before his ear. There was a footprint in the air, a smell, a faint but real trail. That morning he left earlier than usual. Emma was still sleeping wrapped in her blanket with the hawk pendant clutched between her fingers. Jeremiah crossed the stream and went into the less visible paths. He was looking for animals but found smoke. He followed it cautiously without being seen. It was old smoke, thin, like what fires leave when no one tends them anymore. And when he reached the clearing, he understood everything. Broken wagons, wheels sunk in mud, open boxes, soaked books, torn clothes, dead horses, the caravan, the same one Emma came from. There were no bodies, but clear signs that something had happened, an attack perhaps, or a stampede, or a mixture of both. Jeremiah didn't get closer than necessary. It wasn't his place, but he recognized an embroidered handkerchief with golden threads hanging from a branch. He took it, wrapped it, and kept it. When he returned to the refuge, Emma was sitting by the fire. She looked at him as he entered. He said nothing at first, just sat in front of her with downcast eyes, and then took out the handkerchief, placed it on the blanket between them. She recognized it instantly. "It's mine." He nodded. "The wagons in the south, no one there. How are they?" "Bad." Emma looked down. She didn't cry. She didn't scream, just stayed silent with her fingers on the embroidery. Her mind began to reconstruct what Jeremiah hadn't said, that they wouldn't come back for her, that there wasn't a father desperately searching, nor an escort riding to her rescue. Someone else? Didn't see people. She nodded slowly, then got up and left. Jeremiah didn't stop her. He stayed by the fire, waiting. Emma walked to the edge of the clearing. She stayed there looking toward the horizon, toward where her world had broken, and for the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel fear. She felt emptiness, and in that emptiness, a question she had never asked herself: who am I if they're no longer looking for me? She didn't know how much time passed there. The sun was going down, and the wind played with the dry leaves. Finally, she returned to the cabin. She entered without looking at Jeremiah, but sat beside him. "Would you give me a knife?" she asked him. He looked at her without understanding. "I want to learn." "Learn what?" "To live here, not to die if I'm left alone." Jeremiah held her gaze for a few seconds, then stood up, went to his wooden table and returned with a small knife with a dark handle and thin blade. "It's not for fighting," he said. "It's for cutting, for defending, for having respect for what you kill." Emma took it carefully, as if accepting a pact, and in a way she was. That night they didn't sleep apart. They didn't share the bed, but they stayed by the fire, back to back, without sweet words, without promises, just the certainty that what they had built in silence was beginning to resemble a home. Emma was no longer the city girl who asked if the water was safe or if the leaves were poisonous. She no longer waited for someone to come save her, because for the first time she understood that no one else would, and that, instead of breaking her, made her stronger. From then on, the mornings were no longer just of gathering and fire, they were of teaching. Emma woke up early before Jeremiah left. She followed him at a short distance with her wooden staff and the small knife wrapped in cloth hanging from her belt. At first he said nothing, just looked at her with that neutral gesture he had when he didn't want to reveal his opinion, but he didn't stop her. He let her walk, and then, without anyone proposing it, he began to teach her. "This isn't stepped on," he said one morning, pointing to a flower with blue petals. "It's medicine. If you break it, it loses its strength." Emma nodded, concentrated. "What's it called?" "Don't know in your language." "Tell me yours." Jeremiah looked sideways. "Bearberry, woman's flower." "Why that name?" "Cures the pains that men don't understand." She said nothing, just memorized it. And the next day, when they passed by the same place, she stopped and greeted it as if it was someone known. "Good morning, woman's flower," she whispered. She learned to light fires with flint, to distinguish deer tracks from coyote tracks, to read the sky, to smell the rain. She discovered that trees spoke, but only if one stayed still, that silence was necessary to survive, that fear wasn't conquered by shouting, but by walking with it beside you. "Don't touch this," said Jeremiah one afternoon, stopping her with a sharp gesture. Emma lowered her hand. She had been about to brush against a thorny plant. "What is it?" "Slow poison. On the skin it doesn't kill, but it burns for days." She nodded. She wasn't offended when he spoke to her curtly. She was beginning to understand that Jeremiah didn't say things harshly, but out of necessity. The forest had rules, and he respected them as if they were sacred laws. "Did you learn alone?" she asked one night while they shared fish by the fire. Jeremiah drank a sip of water before answering. "My grandfather taught me when I was a boy, before the soldiers came." "And your grandfather died? They killed him?" Emma looked down. "By soldiers? By fear?" Jeremiah shrugged. "They had guns. He had a song." He said no more, and she didn't insist. Over time, the words between them began to flow better. Emma spoke in short, clear sentences. Jeremiah corrected without mockery. Sometimes he imitated her, repeating new words. Both mixed, learned, laughed. "How do you say earth in your language?" "Ground." "And sky?" "Sky." "Ground." "Sky." "Earth and sky." "Not so easy." He smiled. "Here," he pointed to his chest. "Also, here, yes. Without this, you don't understand anything." Emma looked at him for a long time and understood that they weren't just talking about language. They were talking about seeing, about listening, about not imposing, but learning. And in that new language, they were creating between the two, made of gestures, looks, loose words. Something else was beginning to grow. It wasn't love, but something that resembled it, something that didn't need a name, because it already had roots. The heat began to give way. The sun no longer hit with the same fury, and the highest leaves of the trees began to take on a golden tone. Emma noticed it in the way the wind blew at night, in the different silence of the forest, and also in herself. She no longer looked at her feet when she walked. She no longer feared sleeping with the knife far away. She no longer woke up startled by the idea of being alone, because she wasn't, not completely. Jeremiah was still a mystery, but no longer a stranger. They shared the fire, the food, the work. They even shared the silences, and those Emma was beginning to understand better than words. One afternoon, while they were collecting bark to light the stove, Emma saw him take off his shirt to wash a spare one in the stream. It was the first time she had seen him like this, without the layer of fabric that always covered him. His skin was furrowed with marks, not common scars, but deep, long ones like wounds that were made to leave memory. He noticed her gaze and turned around slowly. "Who did that to you?" Jeremiah didn't answer. He finished rinsing the garment, hung it on a branch, and sat next to her in silence. Emma sat too, but didn't insist. She just waited for him, as he had waited for her so many times. "Soldiers," he said finally, without looking up. "They tied me to a post. They asked me things I didn't know. They beat me for not answering." "How old were you?" 18. Emma clenched her fists on her knees. There was something in the way he told it that hurt her more than the story itself. He didn't cry, didn't raise his voice, but the emptiness in his tone weighed heavily. "I don't pity you," she said firmly. Jeremiah barely looked at her. "Good. I just listened to you." He felt her. Then slowly he took a twig and drew a spiral in the earth. "After that, I no longer wanted to return to my people. They said that anger had changed me, that I brought bad spirit. Do you believe it?" "No, but sometimes I feel it inside." Emma leaned over and erased the spiral with her hand. "That doesn't define you." "And you?" he asked suddenly. "What left you marked?" Emma remained motionless. "My world, the one that raised me, the one that told me how I should be, how I should speak, how I should marry a man I didn't love because it was convenient. And now I breathe for myself." That night they didn't talk much, but they shared the same space closer than ever. Emma cooked bread with dry flour and herbs that Jeremiah had gathered. He ate in silence, but when he finished, he cleaned the last bit from the bowl with his finger and gave her a fleeting look. He didn't say it was good, but Emma knew. Then, while he sharpened a stone, she asked him to teach her. "I can." Jeremiah moved aside a little, handed her the tool and watched her. Her fingers were still clumsy, but she had patience. He didn't correct her brusquely, only with gestures. "You have strong hands," he said. "They weren't before. I have them because I'm here. And here, you're not weak." Emma looked at him. In his eyes there was no desire yet, no soft tenderness, but there was respect and a new way of seeing her. No longer as the lost girl from the river, no longer as the frightened white woman, but as what she was now, a woman who earned her place and who, without knowing it, already occupied it. That night the sky was so clear it seemed like an inverted prairie. Thousands of points twinkled over the mountain like sleeping embers. Emma had never seen such a firmament. In the city the lights hid everything. In the wilderness everything was revealed. They had dined in silence, as always, but a different silence charged. Jeremiah had returned with a small deer. He skinned it with precision, with that skill of his that mixed respect and dexterity. Emma helped him prepare the meat, salt the pieces. Her hands no longer trembled when touching blood. "Blessed," he said when he finished storing everything. She followed him without asking. Jeremiah led outside the cabin, down a narrow path through the trees to a wide flat rock that dominated the valley. There the sky opened entire, without obstacles. The air was cold, but not cutting. The world below slept. Only they were awake. They sat together, shoulder to shoulder without touching. "I never saw so many stars," Emma whispered. "Always there, just no one sees them." She smiled. Then she raised her hand and pointed to a constellation. "That one, what's it called?" Jeremiah followed her with his gaze. "The hunter, the night-bearer. And that one?" "That one has no name. It's where spirits rest. Do you believe it?" "Not everything I believe has shape." Emma looked at the sky for a long time. "My mother sang me a song before sleeping," she said suddenly, not knowing why. And then she began to sing it slowly, with a soft voice, barely a thread, as if she feared the forest would hear her. It was an old melody, sad, with simple words, a lullaby. Jeremiah said nothing, didn't move, just listened to her. When she finished, she shrugged. "It's been a long time since I sang it." He stayed quiet for a few more seconds. "Your voice sounds like calm water." Emma laughed, surprised. "That was a compliment, wasn't it?" He nodded. "My people sing with their chest. You sing with your soul." Emma looked at him. He wasn't seducing her. He wasn't playing. He spoke with clean honesty, almost clumsy, and that moved her more than any pretty phrase. "How do you say soul in your language?" "Spirit," she repeated, mispronounced. He corrected with a slight smile. He said it again, and Emma imitated better. So they spent several minutes saying loose words, sharing names of the sky, of the body, of fire. Jeremiah taught her how to call the moon, how to say I and you, how to form a simple phrase, "You are here." Emma repeated it. They looked at each other, and in that instant, for the first time, there was no need to explain anything. The eyes said more than the mouths, the chest more than the hands, and although they didn't touch, the space between them became sacred. On the way back to the cabin, they walked closer. When they arrived, Emma entered first, but as she passed by him, she brushed his hand with hers. It was just an instant. Jeremiah didn't move. He just closed his fingers as if keeping something he didn't want to let go. That night, while she slept, he stayed by the fire, looking at the embers, listening to her breathing, and for the first time since his childhood, he didn't feel alone. Summer was beginning to retreat. The wind changed direction, and the smell of the earth became denser, more humid. Emma no longer thought about the calendar. She measured time by the way Jeremiah looked at the horizon, by the fruit that began to ripen, by the birds that grouped higher in the sky. There were nights when they didn't talk, but they slept close. Others shared loose words until sleep overcame them. The language between them was no longer a bridge, it was a refuge. Until one morning Jeremiah stopped halfway to the stream. His steps, which used to be firm and light, became slow, heavy. Emma noticed. "What's wrong?" He didn't respond. He crouched, touched the wet earth, sniffed the air, then stood up with a frown. "We're not alone." Emma felt a hard blow in her chest. "Who?" Jeremiah didn't respond immediately. He walked in a circle, observing the ground. Then he looked up at the trees. "They passed here a day ago, maybe 2. White men, not Indians. They smell of metal, of gunpowder and desperation." Emma swallowed. "What are they looking for?" "Gold, food, something to steal." "And if they find us?" Jeremiah looked at her. "They won't find me. You neither if you do what I tell you." That afternoon the cabin became quieter than ever. Jeremiah hid the valuable objects, covered the entrance with branches, put out the fire before nightfall, prepared a sack with dried meat, water, and a blanket. "If something happens to me, you run toward the river and follow it downstream," he told her. "No detours. Don't look back. Don't say that. I say it because it can happen." Emma gritted her teeth. "I'm not going to leave you. You'll have to do it if the moment comes." She angrily refused, but deep down she knew he was right. They didn't take long to appear. There were 4 armed men with dirty clothes of prospectors. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't come with flags, only with greed hanging in their gaze. Jeremiah saw them before they got too close. Emma was hidden among branches and earth behind a low hill. From there she could see without being seen. The men arrived with clumsy steps. The one who seemed to be the leader carried a short shotgun hanging from his chest. "Is anyone there?" one shouted with a rough voice. "We saw smoke days ago. We just want to talk." Jeremiah didn't answer. He didn't move. "We're not going to hurt anyone. We just want to rest, eat something. Hey, are you an Indian?" They spat the last word with disgust, as if it weren't human. "Out," said Jeremiah, without raising his voice. One of them laughed. "Look, the savage speaks. There's nothing for you here. We'll decide that ourselves." Then one took a step forward, and Jeremiah tensed his bow. The sound was brief, the impact dry, an arrow stuck in the ground centimeters from his boots. The message was clear. The men stayed still for a few seconds. They evaluated, measured, and decided to leave. Not because they understood, but because they still retained some fear. Emma came out of her hiding place when the last one disappeared among the trees. She ran toward him. "Are you okay?" Jeremiah nodded, breathed deeply. "They'll return." "I don't know, but they already know they're not welcome here." Emma trembled, not from fear, from something harder to explain. "I thought you were going to kill them." "No, just remind them." "Remind them what?" "That not everything belongs to them." That night they didn't talk much, but when they lay down, Emma didn't move away. She slid to his side, put a hand on his chest, and rested her head on his shoulder. Jeremiah said nothing, but passed his arm around her waist and held her like that firmly, as if for the first time he wasn't just protecting himself, but also her. The threat left, but not the trembling. It had remained in the air like invisible dust that covered everything. Emma felt it in the way Jeremiah walked more tense, slept less, sharpened arrows with new concentration. He was no longer just the guardian of the mountain, he was also her guardian, and that made him vulnerable. Emma didn't know what to do with that idea. She carried it inside like carrying something hot between her hands carefully, afraid to drop it, but also to hold on too tight. In the days that followed, they worked closer than ever, cut wood together, cleaned the roof before the first rains, reinforced the walls. He taught her to use the knife with precision, to throw a stone, to stun small birds. Emma learned quickly, but in her eyes there was something else. It was no longer just concentration, it was searching. One afternoon, while sewing a torn blanket, Emma let her voice come out without warning. "Have you ever been in love?" Jeremiah looked up from his task. "Why do you ask that?" "Because I don't know if I am, and I wanted to know how it feels." He took time to answer, finished tying a rope, then said, "When you are, your chest hurts, but not because you're missing something, but because you're no longer alone in there." Emma nodded in silence. "Then I think I am." Jeremiah remained motionless. He looked at her without moving, with a serious face, as if each of her words had remained floating between them. "Me too," he said finally, in a low voice. That night there was no dry wood for the fire, only slow embers that gave a reddish light. Emma was sitting next to him with barefoot feet wrapped in a blanket. Jeremiah was boiling water with bitter roots. "What does that mean to you?" she asked suddenly. "What, being in love?" Jeremiah looked at her, then looked away at the fire. "It means I don't run if I'm afraid. I don't walk away if you hurt me." She approached slowly, sat right in front of him. Do I scare you?" "No," he answered without hesitation. "Do I give you truth?" Emma blinked. The silence between them was so intense it hurt. "Jeremiah," she whispered, "I don't know how this is done." "Neither do I." They stayed like that, without advancing, without touching yet. But in their eyes there was no longer distance, only fire. Later, when preparing the bed to sleep, their hands brushed, a gesture without importance. Until that moment, Emma didn't withdraw, and neither did he. Then she took his hand. His was large, rough, with marks of years of outdoor life, hers finer but firm. He intertwined his fingers with hers, held it like that. There was no kiss, no caress beyond, but Emma felt it in her chest, in her neck, in her belly, like a shudder that didn't need a name. "Tell me something," she asked. "What?" "What you don't dare." Jeremiah looked at her. His lips moved, not with difficulty, but with respect for what he was going to say. "You changed me." She didn't respond, just looked at him long, deep, and then rested her forehead against his, closing her eyes. The world stopped in that instant, not by magic, but because everything important had already been said, without needing to say more. The autumn wind brought different smells, of distant fire, of skin dressed with newly sewn fabrics, of horse steps. Emma noticed it first when waking one morning with the feeling that something had moved beyond the trees. The forest didn't sound the same. The birds fell silent earlier. Jeremiah's dogs growled low, tense. "There are people nearby," she said while tying her hair. Jeremiah already knew. It wasn't fear that was on his face, but resignation. The mountain could protect them from almost everything, except the echo of the world Emma had belonged to. At mid-afternoon they saw the silhouette of a rider outlined between the pines. He didn't carry a weapon in his hand, only a white flag poorly improvised tied to a stick. Jeremiah asked Emma to hide, but she refused. "If it's someone who knows me, I have to look him in the eyes." Jeremiah didn't insist, but stayed by her side firmly. The rider dismounted. He was an older man with unkempt beard and dusty boots. His face tensed when he saw her. "Miss Emma, my God, it's you." She felt her fingers freeze. "Who are you?" "Douglas, the caravan guide. I survived the attack." "We gave you up for dead. Your father believed never again." "My father lives." "Yes, he's at a fort not far away. He sent me with a group to look for traces. We didn't believe we'd find her with—" He looked at Jeremiah with suspicion. "Company." Emma stepped forward. "He saved my life." Douglas didn't respond, just looked down. "You must come with me. The judge is sick. The only thing he repeats for weeks is your name. If you return now, you still can." She interrupted him. "I can't decide now." Douglas looked at her strangely, as if he didn't understand what needed to be thought about. "He's a mountain man, miss. He can't offer you anything. You're a lady." "A lady," she whispered, almost to herself, and then she knew that title no longer belonged to her, nor did she want it. "Can I speak with him alone?" she asked Jeremiah. He nodded without resistance. When they were alone, Douglas lowered his voice. "Listen, Emma, I don't know what you've lived here, but you've been too long in this wild land. You don't see it, but you've stopped being who you were." She looked at him firmly, clearly. "Maybe that's why I survived. Your father believes you were kidnapped, that this man held you by force, and if that's what he declares to the army—" Emma tensed. "What are you saying? If you don't speak, he'll be arrested, judged. There's no possible defense for a mountain man with a white woman." The silence became thicker than fog. Emma felt her heart beating at her temples. She turned her gaze toward Jeremiah, who was watching them from afar without moving. "I'll return with you," she said finally. "But if they touch that man, if they accuse him of something he didn't do, I swear I won't be silent." Douglas didn't respond, just nodded uncomfortably. And then, without waiting more, Emma walked toward Jeremiah, stopped in front of him, didn't know what to say. She looked him in the eyes, hoping he would understand what even she didn't know how to express. "I have to go," she murmured. "Just for a while. My father is dying." Jeremiah didn't stop her. "I understand. Will I return?" she asked. "I don't know." He didn't promise anything. She didn't either. They just looked at each other, and in that look they left everything they couldn't say. Emma mounted the horse. Douglas guided her toward the path, and when the forest closed behind them, Jeremiah stayed alone again. But something in his way of standing said he wasn't expecting an ending, but a return. The fort rose in the middle of the desert, like an old and rusty promise. It was a square of wood and smoke with uniformed soldiers walking in circles, women in faded dresses and men who spoke in low voices, but judged in loud ones. Emma hadn't seen anything like that since the last time she wore a corset. The air there weighed differently, not from heat, from looks. They received her with a mixture of relief and scandal. A white woman, young, alive after being given up for dead, and with a mountain man. That last part they didn't say out loud, but it was in everyone's eyes. Her father, Judge Alcott, lay in a campaign bed, more bone than voice. When he saw her enter, his face broke. "Emma." She approached, took his hand, felt how it trembled. "I'm here, Father." "What did that savage do to you?" Emma blinked. The pain in his words hit her more than any whip. "He saved me, protected me, taught me." The man wanted to speak, but his breath failed him. That same night, the story began to run through the fort like gunpowder, that Emma had been kidnapped, that the mountain man held her against her will, that he had corrupted her. She heard it all from her room, where they had installed her as if she were made of glass. She wasn't allowed to go out alone, couldn't speak to the press. Her voice, once again, wasn't hers, but they captured Jeremiah on the second day. He had approached the fort to see her. They detained him without violence, but with contempt. They tied his hands, pushed him, locked him in a cell without asking him anything, just for what he was, for his way of life, for Emma's face. She learned of his capture from a maid who whispered the news when leaving her food. "Where is he?" Emma asked. "In the cell on the east side, but you can't see him. Miss, the colonel has already said he'll be judged." "Why?" "For kidnapping, for assault, for all that." Emma felt a roar in her chest. It wasn't fear, it was fury. The trial was the next day. Improvised, quick, a circus with uniform. She presented herself without anyone calling her. She entered the room with her face erect, hair gathered firmly, and a voice that made people tremble. "I want to speak." The colonel, a man with thick eyebrows and tired gaze, tried to silence her. "Miss, here a formal case hasn't been opened. We're just judging him. Even if you deny it, you're judging him." Everyone looked at her. "That man," said Emma, pointing to Jeremiah, who was handcuffed in a corner, "didn't kidnap me. He found me injured, abandoned by this same caravan that now accuses him. He healed me, fed me, taught me to survive. Miss Alcott, your emotional state—" "I'm clearer than ever," she shouted. The silence was absolute. Emma walked to the center of the room. "He treated me with more humanity than many of you. He never touched me without permission, never raised his voice, never told me what I should do. He looked at me as an equal." "That man is a mountain man," spat one of the officers. "Yes, and still he's more of a man than many of those who are here." A murmur ran through the room. The colonel tried to restore order, but it was too late. Emma's words had fallen like a stone in a quiet lake. They couldn't be withdrawn, they couldn't be ignored. Hours later, Jeremiah was released, not because they believed in his innocence, but because they didn't know what to do with a white woman who spoke like that, because it was easier to release him than face what her testimony revealed. Emma waited for him outside the fort. He came out with his head high, without looking to the sides. When he saw her, he stopped. He said nothing. She did. "Do you still want me to run downstream if everything breaks?" Jeremiah took time to answer. Then he said, "No longer. Now I want you to run toward me." Emma approached, hugged him slowly with all the time in the world and in the middle of the dust, of the trial of the world that didn't understand them. They chose each other again and forever. During the following days, Emma and Jeremiah stayed close to the mountain's limit, in silence watching the roads, distrusting kind gestures and eyes that rested too long on them. They knew they had gained time, not freedom, that the forgiveness of the civilized world didn't come without conditions. Emma's father died a few days later. There were no words between them at the end, only a faint look, a tired caress on his daughter's hand, as if in his last breath he had understood something he had refused to see all his life. At the burial, Emma remained alone, apart. The mother hadn't survived the attack months earlier. Acquaintances avoided her. Women looked at her sideways, some men murmured when passing. Poor creature. What would that savage have done to her to have her so confused? They say she doesn't want to return. And it was true. At dawn on the third day, Emma dressed in simple clothes, gathered a few belongings, and left the fort without saying goodbye. Jeremiah waited for her in the forest, as he had promised. They didn't speak when they met again, just walked. But when crossing the last path toward the mountain, a patrol stopped them. "Are you going with him?" asked a young lieutenant mounted on a pale horse. "Yes," Emma answered with a firm voice. "I don't recommend it. Life out there is hard, and there's no return for those who cross that line." Emma raised her face proudly. "There never was for me." They walked for hours, crossed rivers, valleys, and areas that only Jeremiah knew. They didn't talk much. Each step was a farewell to a world that no longer belonged to them, but it was also a baptism. At mid-afternoon they stopped at the top of a hill, where they used to stop when everything began. From there the forest could be seen extending like a promise, and beyond the distant smoke of the fort increasingly faint. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I was since I opened my eyes by the river." Jeremiah looked at her. For the first time in weeks his eyes were calm, but then the dense, fast, violent smoke appeared. From the north flames rose. A squad of armed men had set fire to the lower part of the valley. It was a message, a punishment, a warning. "They burned the refuges," said Jeremiah with a tense voice. "Why?" "Because they don't accept that someone like you chose someone like me." Emma gritted her teeth, felt rage, pain, but not fear. "Then let's build where they can't reach." He looked at her as if he couldn't believe those words had come from her. "Do you know what you're saying?" "Yes, and this time, I don't plan to regret it." That night, they camped on top of a flat rock, surrounded by centennial trees. There was no cabin, no walls, only sky, wind, and each other's warmth. Emma spread her blanket next to Jeremiah's, lay down without ceremony, looked at him. "Here we begin." He nodded. "Here or anywhere the world doesn't deny us." She brought her body close to his, kissed him slowly, without fear, without hurry. And in that first kiss there was no urgency, there was acceptance. His for having always been the outsider, hers for having left behind the title, the blood, and the surname. And together, between the fire that burned in the distance and the one born in their skin, they decided they no longer needed permission, only each other. Days passed, then weeks. The forest accepted them as one more of its secrets. Far from the roads and smoke, they found a wide clearing by the river. There grew large willows with branches that fell like green curtains until touching the water. Jeremiah chose it without speaking. Emma knew without asking. "Here it will be," he said one morning, seeing how the sun filtered through the leaves. Emma looked around. There were no walls, no roofs, and yet it was the safest place she had felt in years. They built together, Jeremiah with his strength, Emma with her hands. They raised a hut with thick branches, mud, stone. They gathered dry skins, carved bowls, wove blankets. Day after day, without schedule, without plan, as if love had form in simple things. "Do you miss anything from your previous life?" Jeremiah asked her one afternoon while they carried a log between them. "Sometimes the smell of freshly baked bread, books. I can teach you to make bread, and I can teach you to read." They looked at each other, smiled. "Then I don't miss anything," she concluded. The willows with their long branches became witnesses to their routine. There they washed clothes, hunted fish, bathed when the heat pressed. Emma used to sing at dusk while collecting firewood, soft songs almost like prayers. Jeremiah always listened to her in silence. One night he approached with something wrapped in buckskin. "For you." Emma opened it. It was a wooden figure carved with patient hands, a woman sitting next to a hawk. It wasn't completely finished, but it already had a face, hers. She caressed it, as if it were a living heart. "Thank you." Jeremiah said nothing, just sat next to her. "Do you believe in signs?" Emma asked suddenly. "What kind of signs?" "Those that aren't seen but are felt." He looked at her. "I felt you before finding you." "Where?" "In dreams there was a river, willows, and a woman with a clear voice. She had no face, but she spoke to me." Emma closed her eyes, believed him, not because it was a pretty story, but because if they had learned anything together, it was that truth doesn't always need proof. One morning Emma vomited. It wasn't serious, just unexpected. Jeremiah looked at her in silence, touched her forehead. There was no fever. "Did you eat something strange?" She denied. "The same as you." Days later it happened again, then dizziness, deep sleep, sensitive chest. Emma knew before saying it. "I'm going to be a mother." Jeremiah remained motionless, not from surprise, but from the depth of the moment. He approached, touched her with both hands slowly as if her belly were sacred ground. "Our child will grow with the trees," he whispered, "and with stories, and without fear." Emma felt her heart fill with something new. It wasn't just love, it was peace, roots taking hold. That night they slept embraced under the willows on buffalo hides, with the sound of the river as a lullaby. The moon entered in pieces through the leaves. They didn't need more, no walls, no blessings, no permission. Just their cabin of earth and wood, and a child who already beat under Emma's skin like a promise woven in silence. The months passed like the river water, constant, without hurry. The cabin became home, the clearing became village, and the forest became world. Emma no longer remembered what day of the week it was. She only counted time by the growth of her belly and the new strength she felt in her chest. a quiet strength, of deep root. Jeremiah carved wood every afternoon. His weathered hands produced objects with souls, spoons, figures, baskets, toys that didn't yet have an owner. When Emma asked him why he made so many, he answered, "Someday children will come to the clearing and they'll want stories, yours, mine, the wind's." Emma laughed, and then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she taught him written words, simple letters, which he copied with patience and pride. "River," she said, tracing the letters in dirt, as if the water itself spoke. Jeremiah smiled barely, kept those words like someone who secretly gathers seeds. The child was born one morning of thick fog, without screams, without doctors, only with shared breathing, firm hands, and the instinct of bodies that already know each other. Emma brought him into the world with feet firm on the earth and forehead soaked with sweat. Jeremiah received him, cleaned him, held him with wet eyes and low voice. "He's strong," he said. "Beautiful," she answered. They called him Daniel, which means pine in Jeremiah's tongue, because he was born under their shelter in the same place where Emma felt him move for the first time. The years passed. Daniel grew among animals, songs, and mixed languages. He knew how to say mama in English, father in his father's mountain tongue, and water in both. Emma read him stories every night sitting on a blanket by the fire. Jeremiah told him ancient myths under the stars with gestures and words that came from further back than any book. "Where do we live?" Daniel asked one night. "Here," Emma answered. "And what is this place called?" She looked at Jeremiah. He looked at the sky. "It has no name," he said, "because what is only ours doesn't need one." Sometimes travelers arrived, wounded or lost. They asked for water, food, direction. They always left with more than they asked for. Some returned, others didn't. But all, without exception, spoke later of the white woman with firm voice and the mountain man with gentle eyes, and said that in the deepest part of the forest, where the path disappears and the river speaks softly, there's a cabin where love lives, not the one from tales or laws, but the one built with mud, patience, and choice. One afternoon, while Daniel slept his nap, Emma sat next to Jeremiah under her favorite willow. The sun crossed the branches, as if the sky wove with light. "Are you happy?" she asked him. "I don't have another life to compare with." "I do," Emma whispered, "and I had never felt this peace." He nodded, took her hand, said no more. And in that silence, in that nameless land, under the tree where everything began, Emma knew she had arrived, not to a place but to herself. The seasons turned like pages in an unwritten book. Daniel learned to track deer through fresh snow, to read weather in cloud formations, to speak the silent language his father had mastered. Emma taught him letters scratched in dirt, numbers counted on pine cones, stories that came from books she remembered, and others born from mountain wind. Their life had rhythm but no schedule. They woke with sunrise, slept when darkness claimed the valleys. Daniel grew tall and strong, with calloused hands that could craft tools and gentle eyes that could calm frightened animals. He learned that survival meant more than staying alive. It meant staying human. When Daniel reached his 20th year, trappers began appearing more frequently in their territory. The railroad was pushing west, bringing change like wildfire across the land. Towns sprouted where only wilderness had been. The outside world pressed closer each season. One autumn morning, a group of surveyors camped near their hidden valley. They carried maps and instruments, measuring and marking the land for something they called progress. Emma watched them through the trees, feeling something cold settle in her chest. "They're mapping everything," she told Jeremiah that evening. "Soon there won't be any wild places left." He nodded, his weathered face serious in the firelight. "The world has a hunger that never fills. It eats mountains and spits out towns." That winter brought changes they couldn't ignore. A trading post appeared 15 miles downstream. Then a settlement. The sounds of axes and saws echoed through valleys that had known only wind and birdsong. The game grew scarce, frightened away by constant noise. Daniel often stood on their high rock, looking toward the distant smoke of civilization. Emma knew he felt the pull of that other world, the one where young men his age sought fortune and adventure. She also knew he felt torn between two lives, the peaceful one they'd built and the unknown one calling from beyond the trees. "What do you want, son?" Jeremiah asked him one evening as they mended traps together. Daniel was quiet for a long time, his hands working automatically while his mind wandered. "I want to see what's out there," he said finally. "But I don't want to lose what's here." Jeremiah smiled, understanding completely. A man can carry his home in his heart. Distance doesn't diminish love. That spring, Daniel left to explore the growing settlements. He promised to return before winter, carrying stories of the changing world. Emma and Jeremiah watched him disappear down the mountain path, both proud and heartbroken. The months without Daniel passed quietly. Emma and Jeremiah rediscovered the solitude they'd known before his birth, but it felt different now, expanded by memory and seasoned by time. They were no longer young, but their love had deepened like aged whiskey. Daniel returned in late autumn, as promised, but not alone. He brought with him a young woman named Sarah, a doctor's daughter from the new town. She was city-bred but curious, frightened but determined. Emma saw something of her younger self in Sarah's wide eyes and careful steps. "She wants to learn," Daniel explained simply. "Like you did, Ma." Emma looked at Sarah, remembering her own arrival in this wilderness 23 years ago, scared, lost, completely unprepared for mountain life. That winter, Sarah learned as Emma had learned. She discovered that strength came from adaptation, that beauty existed in simplicity, that love grew best in ground prepared by respect and understanding. By spring, she had chosen this life as clearly as Emma once had. Years flowed like water over stone, shaping everything slowly but permanently. Daniel and Sarah built their own cabin upstream, close enough for help but far enough for independence. Children came, laughter echoing through the valley where silence had once reigned. Emma became grandmother to 3 little ones, who spoke the mixed language of the mountains. They learned to read both books and animal tracks, to count in English and measure distances in Jeremiah's mountain terms. They grew up believing the whole world was as free and wild as their valley. But the outside world continued its relentless approach. The railroad reached the nearest town. Telegraph wires stretched across horizons that had known only hawk flight. The government began requiring papers for land that had never needed ownership before. One day, officials arrived with documents declaring their valley part of a new county, subject to new laws. They demanded proof of ownership, taxes, compliance with regulations that seemed designed for a different kind of life entirely. "We've lived here 25 years, Emma told them, standing firm despite her graying hair. "We've harmed no one, improved the land, raised children who know how to live with the forest instead of against it." The officials were polite but inflexible. "Ma'am, feelings don't change facts. This land belongs to the government now. You can file for a homestead claim, but you'll need to meet certain requirements, prove improvements, pay fees, submit to inspections." That evening, 3 generations gathered around the fire. The children played quietly, sensing the adults' troubled mood. The conversation was heavy with unspoken questions about the future. "We could comply," Daniel said slowly. "File the papers, pay their fees, become official residents of their new county." Jeremiah shook his head. "Paper doesn't make a home. We built this life with our hands, not with documents." Emma listened to the debate, remembering the choice she'd faced decades ago between 2 worlds. Now the choice was different, but equally profound. Adapt to civilization's demands or find a new wilderness to call home. "There's land to the north," Jeremiah said finally, "beyond the railroad, beyond the counties and their papers. Harder country, but still free." The idea hung in the air like smoke, both frightening and appealing. Sarah spoke up, surprising them all. "I didn't come here to become just another farm wife filing government forms. I came for this, for freedom, for a life that belongs to us, and not to their system." The decision, when it came, felt as natural as spring following winter. They would go north, deeper into the wilderness, carrying everything that mattered and leaving behind everything that didn't. The children were excited by the adventure. The adults felt the weight of leaving home, but also the lightness of maintaining freedom. They spent the summer preparing, drying meat, gathering seeds, crafting tools that would survive the journey. Jeremiah built a cart strong enough for mountain travel. Emma preserved everything she could, bottling summer for the journey ahead. As autumn painted the aspens gold, they began their migration. 3 generations moving together toward an unknown future, united by shared values and mutual love. They left behind the cabin where Daniel was born, the willows where Emma and Jeremiah had found each other, the clearings where children had played. But they carried with them something more valuable than any physical place. They carried the knowledge of how to build a life from nothing but love and determination. They carried the skills to read the land, to live with the seasons, to find home wherever their hearts settled. The journey north took them through country so wild it seemed untouched by human presence. Mountains rose like cathedral spires, valleys spread like green carpets, streams ran crystal clear under endless skies. It was the kind of land that demanded respect and rewarded those who offered it. They found their new valley after 3 weeks of travel, a hidden basin surrounded by peaks too steep for easy access, watered by a river too wild for navigation, blessed with meadows too remote for development. It was perfect in its isolation. "Here," Jeremiah said simply, and everyone understood. This would be their new beginning, their deeper retreat from a world that had forgotten the value of wild places and wild hearts. They built again, faster this time, because experience had taught them what they needed and what they could do without. By winter, they had shelter, food, and the quiet satisfaction of people who had chosen their path deliberately. The children adapted as children do, finding new streams to explore, new trees to climb, new animals to befriend. Sarah discovered she was carrying Daniel's second child, a new life beginning in their new home. Emma felt the rightness of it all, the way everything connected in patterns too complex for understanding, but too perfect for accident. Jeremiah aged gracefully in their new valley, his hair white as winter, but his spirit still strong as mountain stone. He taught his grandchildren the old skills, the patient wisdom of people who lived close to the earth. His hands remained steady on his carving tools, creating toys and tools with equal care. Emma found herself keeper of stories, the one who remembered how it all began by a river where wolves chased and arrows flew. She told the children about the world beyond the mountains, about cities and laws and people who lived by clocks instead of seasons. "Why did you leave all that, Grandma?" little Mary asked one evening, as Emma braided her hair by firelight. Emma smiled, thinking of a young woman who had once traveled in a wagon toward a life she didn't want. "Because I found something better, sweetheart. I found myself, and I found love, and I found a way to live that felt true." The child nodded solemnly, accepting this explanation as children accept all truths that come wrapped in love. Seasons turned, years passed, children grew. Daniel became the family's bridge between old knowledge and new challenges. Sarah proved that city girls could develop mountain hearts given the right conditions and proper guidance. The grandchildren grew up bilingual in English and silence, fluent in both civilization and wilderness. Sometimes travelers found their valley, usually by accident, occasionally by design. Some stayed for a meal and a night's shelter, sharing news of the outside world before continuing their journey. Others lingered longer, drawn by the peace they found among these people who had chosen a different way. A few stayed permanently, becoming part of the extended family that grew around Emma and Jeremiah's original choice. They were always people who understood that some things mattered more than money or status or social approval, people who valued freedom, authenticity, connection to the land and each other. The community they built was small but strong, bound by shared values rather than shared blood. They helped each other through difficulties, celebrated together during good times, and protected the valley that protected them all. Emma lived to see her great-grandchildren born, wild little ones who knew no world but mountains and streams, who thought all grandmothers could track deer, and all grandfathers could predict weather by watching clouds. She lived to see the railroad reach the next valley, and telegraph lines stretch toward their hidden basin. But she also lived to see those same great-grandchildren choose to stay in the mountains, to marry among the other mountain families, to raise children who would know the old ways. The seeds she and Jeremiah had planted had taken root and grown into something that would outlast them both. On a morning when autumn touched the aspens and the first snow dusted the peaks, Emma woke feeling different. She had lived 87 years, the last 60 of them in these mountains. Her body was tired, but her spirit felt light, ready for whatever journey came next. Jeremiah, now 91 and still carving by the fire each evening, sensed the change in her. They sat together on their favorite log, watching the sun paint the peaks gold and rose. They didn't speak much. Words had become unnecessary decades ago. "It's been a good life," Emma said finally. Jeremiah nodded, taking her hand in his. "Better than good. It's been true." They watched the light fade from the mountains, holding hands like young lovers, their hair white but their hearts still young. Emma passed peacefully in her sleep 3 days later, surrounded by family, her last breath as gentle as her first had been violent by that long-ago river. Jeremiah carved her headstone himself, marking it simply, Emma. She found her way home. Jeremiah followed her the next spring, dying as quietly as he had lived, slipping away while whittling on the porch as morning light touched the meadows. His headstone read, Jeremiah, he showed the way. The family buried them side by side under the great oak that shaded their cabin, the tree that had watched over their new beginning in this hidden valley. Wild roses grew over their graves, planted by loving hands and tended by mountain rain. The stories lived on, passed down through generations of children who had never known any world but mountains. They told how a young woman from the city had chosen love over safety, freedom over comfort, truth over convenience. They told how a mountain man had shared his world with someone brave enough to enter it. But mostly they told how two people had found each other, across the divide of different worlds, and built something beautiful together, something that lasted, something that mattered, something that proved love could triumph over anything if it was patient enough, strong enough, true enough. Years later, when the outside world finally reached their hidden valley, when roads were built and power lines strung and the government arrived with papers and regulations, the descendants of Emma and Jeremiah faced the same choice their ancestors had faced. Some stayed and adapted, becoming part of the new world that valued efficiency over beauty, profit over peace. But others remembered the stories, remembered the choice that had started it all, and they gathered their families and moved deeper into the mountains, carrying on the tradition of those who refused to let civilization tame their hearts. And if you travel far enough into the wilderness, beyond the roads and the power lines and the places where cell phones work, you might find them still. Families who live by seasons instead of schedules, who measure wealth in love instead of money, who remember that the most important journeys are the ones that lead us home to ourselves. They say that at the end of the valley, beyond where the willows grow and the roads die, there's a gentle hill where the elk no longer run, where only the wind remains. There, under a solitary oak, there's a nameless stone surrounded by flowers that no one planted. White lilies, tall that sway to the rhythm of ancient air. The old people of the town say that stone keeps the story of a white woman who one day got lost in the forest and no longer wanted to be found. Others tell that it was a mountain man who rescued her, that they lived together, that they loved each other in secret, far from law and judgment. Some doubt that happened, but the children of the valley walk for hours just to see the ruins of the old cabin, and when they return they repeat the same phrase, "There lives silence, the real one." In the end, Emma and Jeremiah's story became more than history. It became legend, then myth, then something even more powerful. It became inspiration for anyone brave enough to choose their own path, to follow their heart instead of convention, to believe that love really can conquer all if you're willing to work for it, fight for it, and never give up on it. Write in the comments the word mountain man to show you enjoyed the whole story. Thank you for accompanying to the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for feeling this story, for walking among the willows, for understanding that love, when it's true, doesn't need to be loud.